Hello, my name is Alejandra Sanchez, and together with Maddie Barsh, we are the co-presidents of the Three Rivers Fibershed. I am also a shepherd within our fibershed and live on a farm in Kenyon, Minnesota. And here is a picture of my soy flock, which was just mentioned. And next slide. And so the most common question we get is, what is the Three Rivers Fibershed? The Three Rivers Fibershed envisions a different way to make textiles, one in which the impact of our textiles are considered from a soil-to-soil perspective, meaning how they are grown to how they break down at the end of their cycle. These soil-to-soil systems create just local economies that honor all who participate, centering on local labor, local fiber, and local natural dyes. Here is a visual representation of what a soil-to-soil system looks like as it relates to natural fibers and textiles and the partners that are involved. It takes into consideration everyone and everything from the land to the animals, the milling and dyeing process, designers and makers, and the garments and beautiful textiles being created. And as we mentioned, the impact to the soil. Three Rivers Fibershed became an affiliate branch of Fibershed in 2016 and became a 501c3 nonprofit in 2021. While our strategic geography is centered around Minneapolis, our Fibershed actually extends out in a 175-mile radius, including portions of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and South Dakota. Both as community members and land stewards of the Three Rivers Fibershed, there are opportunities to become involved in what we refer to as the Fibershed calendar. It is a calendar whose seasons coincide with the growth and tending of our fiber plants and animals. There are ample opportunities to get involved, from the harvest of dye plants to the celebration of sheep shearing day. As the Three Rivers Fibershed, we seek to be a resource to our fiber community by providing opportunities for connection and community building among farmers and mills, artists and makers, consumers, and everyone in between. You can join us in doing this work. Visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter, volunteer at one of our mending bars, or at one of our events. You can take one of our classes or teach one of our classes. And of course, you can join us as a steward growing fiber or dye plants. Now, this brings us to the purpose of today's webinar. In November of 2021, we launched our Soil to Sock Challenge. It is a collaborative endeavor aimed at bringing awareness to the life cycle of our textiles, seen through the perspective of one of our most utilitarian garments, socks. This challenge has been an invitation to deepen our community's understanding of our local fiber region by connecting with local stewards, making and mending a pair of socks, using locally grown wool. Together, community members, makers, and fiber stewards have had the opportunity to engage in programming and classes focused on sustainable textiles, mending socks, how to knit or crochet socks, and spinning sock yarn. During our sock challenge, we received interest from our members wanting a more historical-based approach to the sock. As makers and textile artists, our practice is rooted in history and heritage. By knitting and mending our beloved socks, we are not only tending to the preservation of our earth and soil, but we are also engaging in the preservation of these knitting and mending techniques. In designing this webinar, we could think of no better partner than the Vesterheim. The museum has done extraordinary work in building community and building experiences rooted in Norwegian American folk art. So to our delight, the Vesterheim has also carefully preserved a stunning collection of socks. So without further ado, I hand this over to Susan and Lauren.
Hello, I am honored to partner on this presentation. As Alejandra said, Vesterheim has an extensive collection of inspiring artifacts and an overwhelming selection. Some we will see tonight. So I will summarize some of the next few slides. The information will be available for you to have as a resource following the presentation. So don't be alarmed if there's a lot of text on the slide. I won't be reading it all. I'll be just kind of walking through what that looks like, and then we'll have the information further following the presentation. So as I began preparation for this time together, I started reading some resources of sock history, both in my own personal collection of text as well as a Google search. And I found this article from the Smithsonian Magazine, and it talks about this sock found in a landfill in 1913 to 1914, which ended up in the collections of the British Museum in London. A group of scientists analyzed the dyes in the sock, hoping to better understand the trade and clothing manufacturing practices. Their analysis of the sock revealed 7 hues in a stripy pattern. 3 natural plant-based dyes were used to create the colors: madder root for reds, woad leaves for blues, and wildflowers for yellow. Imagine that it's a child's sock and how delightful that might be to have these fun colored stripy socks. The ancient Egyptians used a looping technique called null binding to create their socks. So imagine earlier socks were made from animal hides, and we were wearing wrapped animal hides or fabric instead of a yarn or a wool sock. So this looping technique, or the development of the looping technique, allowed a separate toe to be made and for further shaping of the sock. And socks date back to the Stone Age, with those earlier versions made from animal pelts wrapped around the feet. The Smithsonian article links to this book, Socks, by Ida Tomshinsky, for further sock history reading. So in the world of null binding, then developed knitting or hand knitting. And in 1589, the first knitting machine was invented. Queen Elizabeth did not like that jobs would potentially be taken away from the hand knitters, and Her Highness found the machine knit socks just uncomfortable. So she nixed it. And the inventor, William Lee, he gained financial support from a different source, so the knitting machine prevailed. After reading through a lot of sock history, a lot of the articles and the readings, they mimicked each other, and there were different variations in the sock history, but pretty much followed that progression throughout. And after reading all that history, a visit to Vesterheim was due. So one type of sock in the Vesterheim collection that I highlighted for tonight's presentation is a colorful style knit with space-dyed yarn or flamagarn. Leslie Darling of Leslie Darling Fibers has taught this dye technique in the Vesterheim natural dye classes. The yarn is dyed kind of like a tie-dye technique, wrapping string around the yarn so it doesn't take up the dye in sections, leaving parts of the yarn undyed. And you can see in this picture where, if I look at the center sock, the purple sock has little sections of white in the sock, and that would have been wrapped so the dye didn't take onto the natural colored yarn. So looking at examples more closely, this first pair was heavily reknit, and it was owned by Kari Starvik. The socks were knit sometime between 1870 and 1900 in Norway. The Storvik family traveled to Granite Falls, Minnesota. The owner of the socks, Kari Storvik, immigrated to the U.S. in 1867. I was interested in this sock because the sock cuff seems to have been reknit with a bright, tightly spun wool yarn to replace the top band. This yarn, it's so tightly spun, or maybe the spinning was different than the Flamagarn yarn, and it looks almost like a boucle in real life. The toes were likely reknit once or maybe twice or even 3 times with contrasting yarn. So you can see the original Flamagarn yarn, and it's possible that the toes were knit in red, but then you can see a darker band of red or almost purple, and then the dark brown or black toe replacement as well. And the heel also looks to be reknit using that darker red yarn. Another sock in the same Flamagarn style, again, a pair of Kari socks, seems to have less wear. The cuff or top band is a knit one, purl one construction, unlike the other sock that we saw with that boucle at the top. And the contrasting heels and toes may be original or reknit using a contrasting color to the Flamagarn yarn. Lorianne published an article about the Storvik collection. And Lorianne, would you like to speak a little bit about the article in Knitting Traditions magazine?
Sure. I had the opportunity to share some more of the knit items from this family. We have quite a few pieces, not only multiple pairs of the resist-dyed socks that you've already seen, but we have mittens and gloves, and even some fun items like a sewn and crochet holder for a potted plant that's very bright and colorful. So we don't always know exactly who did the knitting for the different pieces. With the socks, we believe they were brought from Norway. So we think they were knit by Kari, but some of the others could have been done by her daughter, Mari, or by other female family members.
Thanks, Lorianne. Another collection of socks in the Vesterheim archives are stranded or 2-color knit socks. So I took some time to look at the many different examples. Of the many stranded designs in the collection, several are knit with the traditional 8-pointed star motif. The socks with this design seem to be the same, but are very different. This first pair we look at more closely were donated by Marion and Lila Nelson. The socks were made between 1900 and 1930 in Norway. They made their way to Minneapolis, and again, they're made of wool. The 8-pointed star or 8-petal flower design had heels and the bottom of the foot knit in brown and natural alternating stitches. I did some looking at different Selbu knit patterns, as well as just some other socks on different sites like digitalmuseum.norway. And I noticed that they also had this knit one stitch in dark brown, knit one stitch in natural patterning on the bottom. The foot soles and heels knit with this 1-1 stitch pattern may be original or replaced. And the 1-1 stitch pattern also made it more easy to replace the worn soles. Another pair shows the detail interrupting the star motif pattern. So like a faux seam or a false seam in the back of the sock, And again, you see that 1-1 stitch heel and sole on this sock as well. Another star motif sock with the back line of pattern stitches, with attention again to that faux or pseudo seam, and then one dark and one light and sole pattern. This pair originated again from Norway, and it was knit sometime between 1950 and 1990. So it's a newer pair of wool socks. The backline pattern is slightly more bold and elaborate. The owner of the socks, Odd Anderson, immigrated in 1924 to the US, and the socks were possibly made for him by his mother. Across the socks in Vesterheim collection are more stranded designs, some knit with a slight variation of the 8-pointed star design. And you can see on the bottom of these socks is more of a charted design, or it looks like a little diamond design, as opposed to the previously knit socks with that 1-1 design on the bottom. One of the variation examples caught my attention because they didn't seem to have any repair or mending, even though they show signs of wear or damage. There is little history documented on this pair of socks. When you visit Vesterheim and do an archive collection view, Lorianne, she gives a little sheet of paper that gives all of the information that is provided about the artifact. And this one had no origin, no maker, no known period, no specific location other than the US, and that it was made of wool. The socks are described as hand knit of machine spun wool with a snowflake or star design using natural and dark blue yarns. The longer white cuff, believed to be original to the sock, shows some wear and some hole damage. The sock also has a back shaping commonly seen in socks to show off the muscled calves of the leg. And if any of you had the opportunity to log on to the Facebook presentation last week or 2 weeks ago, developed for Nordic Craft Week. It was a presentation by Nina Granlund Sather, and she talked about it was popular to have big legs, and the people or the men wearing these socks would sometimes put apples or hay in the sock to enlarge the calf. The foot or sole of this sock is knit in a charted pattern, as I pointed out earlier, and then the heel is possibly knit holding 2 strands of wool together for thickness and durability. I believe the heel of this sock was either reknit or it was purposely knit in this marled manner so it was a little more durable. The toes of the sock, matching the white and natural cuff, seem to be again original to the pair and not yet replaced. And the sock cuff, I looked kind of intently at this because I wanted to see how it was cast on. And it looks to be a traditional cast on, but it was possibly done with some knit rows. Or if you look very carefully on the slide on the right, the picture on the right, you can see where it looks like they did 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, but then there's a couple purl stitches in there. So maybe a couple mistakes by the knitter or a design element. And as we were preparing, Andrew, can you go back a slide, please? As we were preparing this presentation and having this conversation, Alejandra, we were talking about the use of nylon and that use of nylon increasing the wearability of socks. Can you speak to us a little bit about that as well?
Yes. So as Susan was preparing the slides and we had a little run through, one of the things that I did notice, and you should also notice as we continue with the presentation, is the dates on each of the sock samples. And so most of them just say wool. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that we always get many questions during our sock challenge about nylon, and people ask, like, why would you use 100% wool socks? Don't you want nylon in there to increase the durability? Well, one of the things that I wanted to challenge folks on is that nylon was actually not invented until 1930, and it wasn't really available to consumers until 1940s. So anything prior to that would have just been 100% wool. And so if we as humans have been knitting and mending socks just with wool for hundreds of years, I kind of want to challenge the idea of using nylon and how long it actually, I guess, trying to outweigh, like, if you use nylon, it may extend the durability of the sock, but then what happens to the sock with the nylon once it goes back into the soil? Because once it starts decomposing, the wool will completely decompose as it's a natural fiber, but the nylon actually leaves fibers and doesn't decompose as quickly. So just some food for thought as we're looking through the samples and looking at the makeup of the socks.
Thank you, Alejandra. And this pair of socks just really captured my heart. It just feels like this poor little sock. It doesn't have a history and all these holes, and it just was really charming to me. And I'm fortunate to have Alejandra to talk about that nylon as well, because this pair of socks was obviously valued, and it could have been repaired by the wearer or the knitter, and it hasn't been yet. So I just really fell in love with this one. Thank you. Andrew, next slide. So another example, these socks were donated by Arnhild Hillesland. Again, another newer pair dating from 1950 to 1990 from the area of Telemark in Norway. Another variation of the star motif, and you can see this one looks slightly more graphic, as well as the star motif and a decorative border. So here we can see the decorative border, and it looks to be the original cuff of the sock. And on the bottom, the heel and the foot are likely to have been replaced due to wear. The heel, again, knit in that marled or holding two strands of yarn together for thickness and durability. And then it looks like the sock foot has been replaced in its entirety with that knit one brown and knit one white 1-1 stitch pattern. So when I was looking at socks, I also was interested in just the toe shaping and how they were, how the toe of the sock was formed. And some of them seem to be a simple decrease to form a star toe, and others use a combination of decreases and then a join at the toe like a Kitchener stitch. And one last stranded pair. I can tell you I had about 20 socks to choose from, and it was really hard to choose which ones to include in the presentation tonight. So when I say one last one, I'm a little bit sad. So one last stranded pair, they're called the Dance Troupe stockings, and they're part of an outfit in the Vesterheim collection. They were possibly made by Christina Fletry for her sons Lars and Oddgeir. The heels were mended using a darning method. And the toe or foot was reknit using contrasting yarn. And then the replacement foot was also darned and mended. So these socks were very loved. And it just shows the importance of mending to save the socks to wear. So many more examples of socks, as I alluded to just previous to this slide, are part of Vesterheim collections, and they're waiting to be explored. So you can see in the front on the photograph on the left, there are two socks in natural colored wool. They have a relief pattern in knits and pearls. Some twisted stitches are popular in this design, as well as cabling. And these socks are popular in the Setesdal area. Sometimes the natural socks are over-dyed black, but they're usually knit in the natural color because it's easier to see the yarn over knitting with black yarn. And then the two pair in the center right photograph are cuffed socks. The top ones, I believe, were knit around 1945, 48. And then I believe the pair underneath of them was closer to the 50s. So those are another style of sock that were popular in the area of Norway, or in Norway. So when Alejandra and I were talking the other day, she asked, are there just wool socks or did they use cotton? And I have a pair in my personal collection that I just chose to include here that have initials knit in kind of a lace, like a yarn over lace pattern. So you can see whose socks they are, and they are cotton. I don't believe they have mending, but then again, they could have been like not used or not worn very much. But yes, cotton socks in addition to wool. I pulled this photograph from Anamor Sandbu's book, Knitting in Art. Anamor has a book that includes art connected to knitting. Sometimes the knitting is portrayed in the painting or in the artwork as shown here, as well as a beautiful extensive history in this book. And I would highly recommend it if you're interested in further history of sock reading. In the Vesterheim library, there are many additional resources that address Norwegian history of socks. This book, called Knitting America, is another additional resource. In addition to projects throughout the book, it has an extensive history by Susan Strawn. I know the book, I don't think it's in publication, but it's still readily available. And some of I just highlighted a couple pages from the book showing some history that's in the book in addition to the patterns that have been developed. In Spin-Off magazine, there were a couple articles that addressed spinning and mending of socks. So again, that use of wool and making sure that you have taken good care of your socks and for a long time to come. In addition, these two socks I pulled from my personal, just little mini library here. Folk Socks by Nancy Bush. Nancy does a beautiful job of incorporating history and then having some socks that you can knit based on history and then also the Ultimate Sock Book from Vogue Knitting Publishers was another one that, again, had a good history read in it. In addition, in my Google search, there were some fun links that I found on sock history, and we'll include those for you to have in your resource list, and you can go online and check those out, because they had some other, like I said earlier, all the history seemed to be pretty aligned, but there were differences in each article that I found. And lastly, the Dale of Norway Olympic Tribute. When I very first signed on a Google search, this came up first, and I thought it was delightful. They took patterns from the 18 team sweaters of the Nordic Olympians and incorporated them into this sock. And I felt like it was a beautiful blend of history, all coming together in this kind of one-of-a-kind sock. So I thought that was a nice way to end our presentation this evening.
Wonderful. Well, I want to start by saying a huge thank you to you, Susan. And I know we have some questions that have come in the chat, and we would certainly welcome more questions. The first question that came, I think, is one that I'm going to throw to Lorraine. Lori is asking, how would someone be able to view the hand knit socks and mittens in Vesterheim's collection?
Great question. All it takes is an appointment. You can get in touch with staff here at Vesterheim, talk with us about what you're interested in the collection and also your schedule. And hopefully we can put together a time and day that will work for both of us to see some objects. You can contact staff. There's an autofill form that you can get on the Vesterheim website. And you can also go to the About part of the website and see a staff list. And the Vesterheim website address, if anyone needs it, is vesterheim.org, Vesterheim, not spelling tonight well, Vesterheim.org.
Fantastic. Thank
And
you.
can I add to that, please? When visiting Lorraine, and she pulls out some pieces from the artifacts, and then she goes off into her office and she comes back with a little sheet sometimes that has just details that are delightful about the artifact. And I just find it really helpful, not only to be able to see the artifact, but to also glean some information about what the background is, or how old it is. Or like Alejandra, you were talking about, I had seen a pair of socks from the 1800s, and then one from the 1900s and one from the 1950s. And it was just really nice to be able to have all that information together.
Wonderful. All right. Another question that's come in through the Q&A is asking about, how did these old socks stay up? They look kind of stretched out on top now. And so what were ways that people held them up if the wool were to stretch?
One of the things that I noticed, the cuffs, sometimes they had a really small knit one, purl one, and then others had like a longer ribbing. I also feel like costume has something to do with that as well. Like how, what else did they wear? Were they wearing a skirt and the sock, or were they wearing knickers and the sock? So I think there were other costume pieces that may have helped to keep the sock up. Yeah, I haven't seen anything where there's like a special band. There wasn't elastic knit in them, obviously, that I could see. And Lorianne, you may have some more costume tips on how to keep your socks up.
Well, at least for some wearers in rural Norway, they did wear garters, and that might take the form of like a braided. It's called fletting in Norwegian, and so it's a multi-strand braid, maybe 12-strand braid that would work to tie the socks, but you would also have a beautiful decorative piece because this was done with multicolored wool yarn. And sometimes it was a band that was woven on a small heddle that could be used to tie the socks up. So there would be some options. I don't think that's the only solution, but certainly that was the solution at times to keep the socks up better. I've got a question for you, Alejandra. How many knitters are taking part in the sock challenge this year?
Well, we have a variety of makers, so not just knitters. We also have spinners, and then we have people who aren't knitters, but who have been taking up the mending challenge. So we don't have exact figures since it's kind of spread across different art practices. But it's not too late to join because the challenge is set to go through November of this year. So you're still able to sign up and participate.
Wonderful. We have a couple questions that have come in the Q&A asking about the scratchiness and itchiness of wool. Helen is wondering if the wool in older socks was itchy, and Lori's wondering if you can address the issue of scratchy wool, and are there other choices like merino wool that folks who find wool itchy could turn to rather than nylon? And I feel like this is an all play kind of conversation.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things to kind of consider when you're tackling this question. First of all, we want to look at the makeup of wool and what it actually is. So it is a protein fiber and it is technically alive. And so if you think about your own hair, you need to also condition your hair. Otherwise, it too gets scratchy and kind of brittle. And then so I'm curious to hear, Susan, what the socks feel like when you were looking at them in the collection, because I'm guessing that they haven't been washed or conditioned in decades, perhaps. So maybe they are a little bit itchier. So people who do find wool itchy, I have a couple of recommendations. First, a lot of the itchiness comes from spinning oil that mills use in order to get the wool processed from raw wool to yarn and then into knitting machines. So they do have to lubricate the wool in order to go through all the different components. And a lot of people actually find the chemicals of the spinning oil to be what causes irritation and not necessarily the wool itself. So I do recommend, whether you're using vintage wool socks or new wool socks, to do a proper scouring to kind of eliminate all of those chemicals that they've added. And then additionally, also making sure that all of your wool products, whether it's a sweater or socks, are properly conditioned, because that's how you kind of rehydrate those fibers so that they're not so brittle and scratchy.
Okay, I'm going to ask, as somebody who doesn't have as deep a knowledge of fiber, what is a proper scouring technique?
Yeah, so hot water, just like really, really hot water. And I know it seems counterintuitive because I know a lot of people think like, oh, isn't the wool going to shrink or felt? But it's the combination of both agitation and hot water. So if you just let your wool socks soak in soap, that in hot water and soap, that should be enough. But don't agitate and don't do this, because then that's when you get the felting bits.
Fabulous.
Have you heard of the, whether it's myth or reality, of women knitting in their own hair as they knit, both whether that's to the leg or to the sole for extra strength?
Yes, I have. And then I've also heard when we were talking about different knitting techniques that people also use other stronger fibers to do the toes and the heels. So not just weaving in their own hair, but also using things like silk or mohair from different animals to strengthen those two areas. And then I also noticed when Susan was showing the slides of that 1x1, where it was like the color alternating in the toes and heels, I think that was also a technique to make sure that the color work was kind of, it kind of doubles up the fabric more than the top, right? Because in the top with the stars, you get more of those floats. So not as much of that interlocking as you do with the one-on-one.
Interesting.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Agreed. I think, and that also, like I think I mentioned, where if you were going to replace or darn the bottom of your socks, it's easier to do it on that 1-1. And you could see that marled, kind of exactly like what you're talking about, Alejandra, where they marled the heel, holding both strands together instead of doing the 1-1. So I thought that was really helpful as well. Thanks, Andrew.
I'm sharing this just so that people can see that 1-1 stitch.
Yeah, and on the left hand slide is a very small charted pattern where you can see the diagonal and kind of that little design element.
Look at that.
But then right down the center is where I believe they did the decreases for the toe, and it's done in a marled or holding both strands together instead of like a 1-1. And then on the other two slides, it's that 1-1, like knit 1 in white, knit 1 in blue, knit 1 in white, knit 1 in blue.
Fabulous. Okay, people seem to be going wild in the chat for how to de-itch their wool. So Alejandra, can you also talk about how to condition your wool? Because I think we have some folks with wool allergies or wool sensitivities in the crowd.
Yeah, so there are a couple of great wool rinses that a lot of knitters are familiar with. So one of the brands is called Euclin. And it's EUCLAN. And so that particular soap or conditioner actually uses lanolin to recondition the wool item that you're dealing with, because as you know, sheep wool naturally has lanolin, and that's what makes it soft. And when you're going through that milling process, they're stripping all of that lanolin away and adding those spinning oils. And so what you want to do when you're ready to wear your garment is actually reintroduce that natural conditioning agent, the lanolin that the sheep produces. So Euclin is a good one. I think, Susan, does Kookaburra also use lanolin in there?
I don't know that one, but yep, I've heard of it.
Yeah, so if you check out any of your local knitting shops, just ask them for a wool wash or a wool conditioner, and they should have some available for you to try.
Wonderful.
Not all of our viewers tonight are familiar with Ravelry. Could you tell us what Ravelry is and maybe mention a favorite part of Ravelry for yourselves?
So Ravelry is an online knitter. It started out kind of like a place for knitters to go. So you had to apply and get accepted into Ravelry, which was just basically making an account and you got accepted. And it's a place to store knitting patterns or crochet patterns, even weaving or machine knitting. You can store your projects and share them with others. And it's a really great tool to search. So like, for example, today I was searching a yarn and I wanted to know what projects other people had knit with the yarn and what needle sizes and how much yarn they used. So I could do a search that way around my yarn. So that was a really helpful tool.
Wonderful.
Alejandra, are you on Ravelry?
I am. Yeah, I'm on there as my farm's name, A Woolen Forest. And I like it for that same reason, Susan, where if I buy a yarn from a shop and I'm not sure what to do with it, I'll look up to see what other folks have done with that particular yarn. Or if I like a pattern, it also has different yarn suggestions. And also the different weights. So like, oh, this shawl is made with worsted weight, because I'm also a spinner. So I know what type of gauge I'm going for when I'm spinning. So I like that too.
Andrew, are you on Ravelry?
I am not, but I definitely go to Ravelry and look at beautiful things when I know that instructors are itching to teach with us, itching like the wool, ha ha ha. No, when we've got instructors who are getting ready to teach, just to look at some of the amazing projects that they do. So I am an appreciator, but not a contributor to Ravelry.
How about you, Lorianne?
Yes, but a little bit like Andrew, I'm more of a lurker, maybe to get inspired. And we've had a request for the names of your where to go to see more on Ravelry for each of you. And so could you tell us again or spell it if you need to?
Alejandra's got hers in the chat. It looks like she's a woolen forest. And,
yep, and mine is Sock Girl again, SOKKGIRL. So I'm on Ravelry as Sock Girl. I'm on Instagram as Sock Girl. And Sock, SOKK, is sock in Norwegian. So that's how I adopted my name, Sock Girl.
Great. Steph Anderson was sharing the heritage breeds in Norway tend to have a less itchy feel to the wool. And so for folks who are looking for something else that they could try, if wool in general has been a problem, but they haven't explored the Norwegian breeds, that could be a wonderful way. And Kelly is asking if there's a breed of sheep that spins into durable sock yarn without the addition of mohair or nylon. Are there specific breeds you would recommend?
Yeah, so one of them is Suffolk. It's an English breed, and it also doesn't felt. So not only do you not need the addition of nylon or mohair, you can also throw it in the washer because it is considered a down breed. So it doesn't have the same characteristics of the scaly felting qualities that you find in some other wools. Another one that I would recommend is Leicester Longwool, which is one of the breeds that I raise here on my farm. And they are a long wool, also from England, that is very strong. And it was originally prized by weavers for its strength and durability. But I know that there are multiple shepherds here in our fiber shed that also raise Leicester Longwools that have made beautiful socks out of their Leicester Longwool without adding anything else.
Hey.
There's a question about the socks that you've seen tonight, the old ones, and how they were used in the past. And I guess I'll tackle that one. The Flamagarn, the resist-dyed socks, were saved for special occasions, and those were worn by women. And part of the reason they were saved for special occasions is because that dye technique was so time-consuming that you wanted that to be considered special. And the two-color socks, the pattern knit ones, were often worn by men, and they were in rural Norway often saved for special occasions because they would show, the men would be wearing knickers and those beautiful patterns would be showing. But once we get to the United States, it was more common for the pattern knit socks to be used by skiers. And so the Odd Anderson socks that we saw, he was a very active skier and ski jumper. And so we believe that the pattern knit socks his mother made for him, he used when he was skiing.
And maybe why they were so heavily darned and reknit. He probably wore them profusely.
These are those Odd Anderson ones, right, Lorianne?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we have several folks, Alejandra, who are asking questions about the sock challenge. And so I think we can do this question, and then I have one more that I'm going to throw to all three of you. So folks are wondering, if they live far away, can they participate? How do they find more information about the sock challenge? I think you're going to have more people after tonight, even than you did before, which is really exciting.
Yes, that is exciting. And we definitely accept people from all over the world. And we do have folks joining us from other parts outside of the US, because we do have virtual events as well and virtual classes. So we have done a couple of like mending socks online and knitting socks online. And so if you just go to the Three Rivers Fibershed website, we do have an events page that has all of our programming, and they should also have a link to our online platform where we have a little bit more of like discussions and forums. But yeah, threeriversfibershed.com should be a great starting point.
Wonderful. Well, Teresa is throwing a question at us, and I think it's great, on a presentation called The History of Socks. She wants to know, what are your thoughts about the future of sock knitting. So I think that's one that all three of you probably have insights into, and I would love to hear all of your thoughts. Susan, I'll throw it to you first.
I was going to throw it to Alejandra.
I'll take the bullet.
Great, go for it, Alejandra.
Okay. Well, I think for me, it'll be easy to answer only because when we were first talking about the sock challenge, we didn't think it was going to be a success because we didn't think people would be interested. And I think, a lot of knitters may be a little intimidated by starting socks because they do tend to be a little bit more like size specific, and there's different fits and everybody has different feet. But I think what we have seen just in this past year is a resurgence in people's interest in preserving all of these heritage techniques and relearning the things that our ancestors knew, and then also in preserving our clothing and paying attention to how our consumption of textiles and our contribution to the making world as well impacts our planet. And so I think a lot of people are really interested in asking those questions. And so I see a very bright future for not only sock knitting, but textile arts in general.
Wonderful.
And I think you just nailed it, because what I see just across many different platforms is that sustainability, that capsule wardrobe, just like having one drawer or one closet, not, like many, many, many socks. And if we do have one special pair of socks, they get mended. And I think there's a real care around what we're doing right now in our sustainability. So not just running to Walmart and getting an 8-pack, but those very special socks, like a wool pair, like a Darn Tough or a Smart Wool, if you're not making your own socks. And they're a little more spendy, but they are durable and they last forever. And, just that special pair of socks.
Great.
Well, and I love socks, especially wool socks. There's something so joyful and comforting about putting on wool socks, and a single object is so fascinating. It can be purely utilitarian. It can be extremely complex and decorative. And I want to thank you both for being with us tonight, because I've noticed new things about the socks after you've been pointing out details and sharing other information about socks and wool. And it's been so much fun for me. Clearly, the future is very bright for socks.